While most homesteaders on the high plains were stacking firewood higher than their cabin roofs and sealing every crack against the coming winter, a 41-year-old Finnish immigrant named Väinö Korpela was doing something that made his neighbors ride over just to confirm he hadn't lost his mind. Behind his newly built one-room cabin on the slight rise of open prairie, Väinö was digging straight down into the earth. Not a root cellar, not a well, a bedroom. 8 feet deep, timber-lined, connected to the cabin by a narrow underground tunnel. "He's digging his own grave," one rancher muttered at the general store in Buffalo, "and come January, he'll be lying in it." What none of them understood was that Väinö wasn't trying to fight the Wyoming winter. He was planning to ignore it entirely. And when the temperature dropped to -47 degrees that January, and men across the county burned through their wood piles in desperation, Väinö Korpela would sleep through the worst cold in living memory without feeding a single log to a stove. Väinö had arrived in Wyoming 4 years earlier, part of a quiet wave of Finnish immigrants who followed rumors of cheap land and open sky in the American West. He came from Ostrobothnia, a region where winter ruled most of the year, and survival wasn't a matter of toughness, but of technique. As a young man, he had worked in copper mines, spending entire seasons underground, where the rock walls held a steady temperature regardless of blizzards or summer heat above. 50 feet below the surface, it did not matter whether wind screamed across the tundra or the sun baked the fields. The earth did not participate in weather. It kept its own counsel. The miners slept in underground barracks during harshest months, warmer without fires than the villagers above ground who fed stoves all night. Väinö never forgot that lesson. The earth had a temperature of its own, and that temperature did not care what season it was. His first winter in Wyoming nearly killed him. He bunked with cowboys on a cattle ranch near Buffalo and watched them burn through stacked cords of pine as if wood were infinite. The stove glowed red deep into the night, and still men woke shivering when the fire died to embers. The wind off the Bighorn Mountains drove cold through every seam in the walls. At -38 degrees, the cabin felt like a fragile box suspended in an ocean of frozen air. Väinö lay awake one night, listening to the stove crackle, and realized something that seemed obvious once he thought it through. The problem was not that winter was too strong. The problem was that they were sleeping above ground, surrounded on all sides by air that could drop to any temperature it pleased. Heat rose, leaked, escaped. Every BTU fought a losing battle against infinity. By 1902, Väinö had saved enough to purchase 40 acres east of Buffalo, flat grazing land with a shallow creek and no trees to speak of. Other settlers built standard cabins and prepared for the same yearly siege. Väinö built his cabin too, but 30 feet behind it, on a patch of slightly higher ground with sandy soil and good drainage, he staked out an 8x10 rectangle. When his nearest neighbor, rancher William Tanner, rode over and asked if he was planning a root cellar, Väinö shook his head. "A bedroom," he said calmly, "8 feet down, where the earth stays warm." Tanner laughed, not cruelly, but with the relaxed certainty of a man who believed he understood his territory. "Friend, underground is where we keep things cold, meat, milk, the dead." Väinö only smiled. "At the surface, yes, but go deeper." He began digging in late May once the ground thawed enough to work. The first 18 inches of prairie loam came easy. Below that, dense clay resisted every stroke of the shovel. He rigged a simple pulley system to haul soil up in buckets and worked alone, day after day, lowering himself into a growing pit. By mid-June, he could stand below ground level and feel the difference immediately. Even as the sun beat down at 75 degrees, the air in the pit was cool and still, insulated from wind. At 5 feet, he began shoring the walls with salvaged pine beams from an abandoned mining structure 20 miles away. Every 2 feet deeper, he added another ring of timber, building a reinforced box within the earth. By late July, he reached 8 feet. Standing at the bottom and pressing his palm to the packed soil, he felt the same steady coolness he remembered from Finland. The chamber took shape slowly. He leveled the floor and laid planks over gravel to keep it dry. He built a secondary timber lining inside the structural shoring, leaving a small air gap to reduce moisture transfer. Heavy beams spanned the ceiling, topped with boards, then covered with 2 feet of earth to restore the thermal mass above. The tunnel required careful engineering, a 3-foot wide, 4-foot high passage sloping gently upward so any water would drain back to a small sump pit. Finally, he installed a 6-inch metal vent pipe from the chamber ceiling to the surface, capped to keep out rain and snow. Warm air would rise naturally through the pipe to the surface, drawing fresh air down through the tunnel from the cabin. No mechanical parts, no fuel, just physics. The gossip intensified as summer turned to fall. At church in Buffalo, women whispered about Vino's wife, Eno, wondering how she could tolerate sleeping in a hole like an animal. Ranchers at the general store predicted flooding, collapse, madness. Pastor Lindgren gently suggested that burrowing underground felt like a step backward from civilized life. Vino listened politely and continued his work. He had measured drainage with pilot holes through 2 rainstorms. He had chosen high ground. He trusted soil more than opinion. By early September, the chamber was complete. He hung a thermometer on the wall. It read 54 degrees. Outside, late summer air hovered near 80 degrees. The earth below did not fluctuate. The first frost came in November. Vino spent a test night alone in the chamber, while Eno remained in the cabin above, tending the stove. The surface temperature dropped to 19 degrees. Underground, the thermometer held at 53 degrees. He slept without waking. No midnight stoking, no drafts across his face. In the morning, he climbed back to a world crusted in frost, while below, nothing had changed. Eno descended the next night, skeptical but curious. She placed her hand against the wall and frowned, confused by the sensation. It was not warm like a stove. It was simply not cold. Stable, quiet. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe he might be right. January 1903 arrived with violence. On the 8th, an Arctic front swept down from Canada and drove temperatures from 15 degrees to minus 24 degrees before midnight. By dawn on January 10th, Johnson County registered minus 47 degrees. Wind gusts of 30 miles per hour turned exposed flesh numb in under a minute. Livestock froze in open fields. Ranchers burned through entire wood piles in days. Johnson's bunkhouse stove ran constantly, yet frost formed on interior walls. Men slept in coats and boots. A homesteader 8 miles from Buffalo ran out of firewood, burned his furniture, then tried to walk to a neighbor. They found him 2 days later, frozen, half a mile short. Each evening during the cold snap, Vino and Eno descended into their underground chamber. The thermometer read 53 degrees. It dipped to 52 degrees on the coldest night. That was the full extent of winter's penetration. 8 feet above them, air that could kill a man in minutes howled across the prairie. Around them, thousands of pounds of soil and clay held the region's annual average temperature, accumulated over seasons, stored like energy in a battery. The human body generates heat at rest. In a space already warmer than freezing, that heat did not flee into the void. It lingered. The earth did not steal warmth. It offered it. On the morning the cold finally broke, William Tanner rode over, wrapped in layers of wool and disbelief. He had expected to find Vino humbled, perhaps half frozen, ready to admit defeat. Instead, he found him splitting wood casually for cooking. The main woodpile stood largely untouched. "You slept down there?" he asked slowly. "Through all of it?" Vino nodded. He led him through the tunnel. Tanner held his lantern inside the chamber and stared at the thermometer. 53 degrees. He pressed his palm to the wall. Cool, but not cold. Still stable. "My men burned 8 cords in 6 days and still froze," he said quietly. Vino opened his notebook, showing daily entries. Surface, minus 47 degrees. Chamber, 52 degrees. Surface, minus 39 degrees. Chamber, 53 degrees. The numbers did not argue. Within weeks, 14 men had visited the chamber.